Check it out, all you folks afraid of finances. We're about to tackle that budget you've been putting off. Let's get started. I'm Tanya Rapley. Welcome to a new series from State Farm and Let's Start Today. This is where you'll find the tools, support, and education you need to take control of your finances today and reach your goals for tomorrow. These helpful courses are inspired by an ever-evolving learning lab known as Nextdoor State Farm. And speaking of Nextdoor, I'm here with Eric, financial coach at Nextdoor State Farm, and State Farm agent Cameron. Thank you guys for joining me.
Thank you.
So we're going to dig into budgeting 101. We're going to discuss the B word. And during this conversation, we'll cover what is a budget, goals versus aspirations, a budget breakdown, current spending habits, changing spending habits, and automating your spending habits. Are you guys ready to dig in?
Sounds good.
All right, so let's start with the basics. What is a budget?
The way I define a budget, it's a priority list for your lifestyle. It's not necessarily a stop doing list or here's what I'm going to sacrifice list. It's more of a gauge to determine whether or not your actions match what you say is important for you and your family.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think it's just a game plan for your money, right? If you have a strong budget, it's a way to tell your money where to go rather than end up wondering where it went, right?
Yeah, a budget shouldn't prevent you from spending. It just shows you how to spend your money properly so that you're accomplishing your goals, which we'll dig into a little later. And so most people, the thought of budgeting confuses them. So high-level view, how do you create a budget?
You add up all your expenses, you subtract them from your income, and what you're left with is money for your goals, right? So that's a budget. Income minus what is going out, your expenses, equals what's left over.
Absolutely.
That's the simplest way to put it. When you say how do you create a budget, I'd probably work backwards into it. Start with what my goals are, what do I want to accomplish, and let that be my priority list, and then apply, what Eric is saying about your expenses and your income.
Yeah, definitely. And you guys work with people every day, and I'm sure that you see quite a few challenges and barriers to people living within their budget. So what are a few obstacles that you think people face when it comes to budgeting?
One of the first things I hear is, let's review my budget. And I say, okay, let's start with your goals and what you want to accomplish. And they say, okay, Cameron, I don't want to do all that. I'll get to that later on tonight. I just want to get to categorizing and looking at my expenses and then, allocating money. That's one of the challenges. You can't skip, setting your goals, whether you're 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, whatever they are. Setting your goals is creating a budget. Those things are one and the same.
And why is that important, right? It's because your goals ultimately are the things you're going to look to when you're having a hard time sticking to your budget, right? When you want to go out to dinner with your friends, but you know that your dining out budget is growing thinner and thinner, right? So the goals are what are going to keep you motivated to succeed and stick to your budget. So I agree with you entirely. It's important to start there.
Right.
Yes, whether you're intentional about it or not. Absolutely. It's kind of like the bucket of water, It's like you're filling up a bucket of water. I know we were talking about it earlier, and you had such a great analogy for it.
Yeah, totally. Think about you've got this bucket, and when you make money, you've got income. That's the water that fills up the bucket, right? But you got some holes in the bucket, and so the bucket doesn't stay full forever. The water starts to leak out, right? So what do most people think to do when that happens? They think, I need to pour more water in the bucket, right? I need to make more money. Right. Well, that's an option, but another way to think about it is try plugging up some holes in the bucket, right? If you patch up those holes, then your bucket will stay fuller for longer. And then you won't need to worry as much about making more money because you're controlling your expenses as well.
If you can make more money, plug up the holes, that's a double down.
You're gonna need, another bucket in no time, right?
Right.
So we've established what a budget is and how to create one. Let's take a look at what we've learned. All right, so now that we've kind of gone over what a budget is, let's talk about goals, because we've mentioned that quite a bit, but there's this thing called aspiration. I think that people use aspirations and goals interchangeably, but they are different. So do you want to talk about the difference between a goal and an aspiration?
Sure. I think aspirations are more general. They're more vague, right? You can aspire to be a business owner, right? Or you can aspire to be debt free. Where goals are a lot more specific,
Yeah.
a lot more measurable and timely.
One way to think about it is aspirations are like your 100 level, your intro goal setting marks to hit. They're general, like you said. It's I want to buy a house one day. Goals take it that step further. They're like your 200 level course or your intermediate. You try to get specific. You attach a dollar sign or a deadline where you can. It's great if you can do both.
Right. You
so-
have to do both. You have to put a deadline, and since we're talking about budgeting, you got to put a dollar sign
Right.
on it.
And so someone says, you know what, I never thought about that. I don't have any goals. What would you say that they do? What would you say they'd start at?
I would start with they have goals. They just haven't articulated those goals.
Yeah.
You have to write it down.
Yeah,
There's real
definitely.
power into taking that time, grabbing a pen, grabbing a piece of paper, and writing down those goals.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think whether you track every transaction, like in a spreadsheet, down to the penny, you know, every cup of coffee you ever bought, right? That's one end of the spectrum. That's
Yeah.
like very, detail oriented. The other end of the spectrum is probably you check your bank account every few days to make sure you got enough money left, right? So
That's something.
everybody budgets, right? Everybody's on that spectrum already. I think that can help overcome some of the intimidation that I think gets associated with budgeting is that everybody is doing it already with the choices that they're making with their money today.
They work together, but the difference between them is that your goal is actually something that has a little more structure. You have an identified date, you have an identified amount that you're working towards. Instead of saying, I want to be debt free, it is, I would like to pay off XYZ card
Right.
by XYZ amount of time. And that's really important.
Sometimes literally keep the goals at the forefront, right? Put it on the bathroom mirror, right? You got your smartphone, you're looking at it all day anyway.
Yeah,
What's your
definitely.
screensaver look like? Because it should look like your next vacation or whatever you're saving up for. Maybe it's a graduation cap you're saving for the kids' college.
I put it on my screensaver.
Okay.
And it changes something motivational
Yeah.
or reaffirming.
It's a reminder. Everybody needs reminders every now and again. And everybody needs small wins every now and again. You know, they encourage us to keep going. We've established the difference between goals and aspirations. Let's have a look at what we learned. So let's kind of switch gears into understanding how a budget breaks down, because debt elimination might just be one part of your budget, but there should be other elements of your budget. And so we have our fixed expenses, we have our variable expenses. Eric, do you want to cover that? Because I know you probably work with people on that all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. I like to think about 3 different categories of expenses. So fixed expenses, that's like the bills, right? That's the stuff that happens every month. The amount doesn't change. You can probably start rattling some of these things off like
your
clockwork.
Mortgage.
Car payment,
Exactly. Car payment, cell phone bill, right?
insurance, health insurance.
Maybe gym membership, any monthly subscriptions you have. So pretty straightforward stuff, right? You probably know exactly when they happen, exactly how much they cost. It's
Absolutely.
not rocket science at that point.
Yeah.
So those are fixed expenses. But think about variable expenses. Those are things that happen every month too, but the amount that you spend on them tends to fluctuate, right? An example that's pretty common for people is groceries, right? So I know that some people out there tend to be really creatures of habit, but it'd be pretty rare if somebody's grocery bill was the exact same every single month, right?
Your entertainment budget, whether it's going to the movies or coffee.
Yeah.
Your ride share. I have a customer, her son uses a ride share company every day from school. So that's a variable expense, but in her mind, that might be a fixed expense. So when you're going through your budget and you're looking at what are fixed expenses versus variable expenses, I mean, now is the moment of truth. You have to scrutinize that really carefully so you don't, have those in the wrong categories.
And, I think a clear takeaway when you're thinking about how to categorize fixed or variable expenses is if it happens every month and the amount does not change, then it's a fixed expense.
Right.
Yeah.
If it happens every month, but the amount fluctuates, variable expense.
Such as electricity, your bills?
Yeah. So like electricity, gas, water for the apartment or the house, good examples. Those, I mean, I just tell people go with your gut. If you feel like they're stable from month to month, maybe they're more fixed expenses for you. If you feel like they fluctuate wildly, then choose to call them variable expenses. The tricky thing with variable expenses, though, Cameron, is how do you know how much to estimate for your groceries or your dining out? And so a tip that I can give people typically is go back and look at your bank statements, right? Get a 3-month average of what you have been spending, specifically on those variable expenses. The bills are easy, right? Those are the same amount every month. They may not be easy, but they don't change in terms of how much they cost, right?
Yeah.
But if you get a 3-month average of what you typically spend on dining out, then if you decide later you want to make any changes, you know, all right, what's a reasonable goal I can set for myself about how much I can reduce spending?
Yeah, I'm happy you pointed that out, Eric, because it is important. I think that that's what confuses some people about their budgeting process. I know what my fixed expenses are, but what about these expenses that change each month? How do I plan for that? And then we have something else, which is the non-monthly expenses. So
Right.
do you want to go into that?
Yeah, absolutely. These are tricky. Sometimes I call these budget busters because we know they're going to happen, but most people don't plan for them, right? So these are the things that don't happen every month, as the name suggests, right? But they tend to be larger expenses, and you know they're going to happen. So an example might be if you get a save the date for a wedding that you're just going to be attending in 6 months. You start thinking about all the different costs that are going to factor in that you're going to need to save up for, right? Hotel, maybe airfare, if you need any new clothes for the wedding, a gift, of course, right?
Yeah, I can't show up empty-handed.
Exactly. Yeah, but it all starts to add up, am I right?
Right.
So if you start to add up the numbers and you realize, okay, I'm going to need $300 for this wedding and it's in 6 months, pretty simple equation. When it comes to non-monthly expenses, I always tell people, take the total amount you need to save, divide it by the number of months you have to save for it, and there you have the number that you should be setting aside for that expense every single month. It doesn't happen every month, but you want to save for it like it does.
Yeah, definitely, because you're spending that money some way or another, right? The money is being spent. Now, whether you allocate it in your budget or not, that's another thing.
That's right.
Vacations and holidays,
Yeah.
especially Christmas. We know Christmas is coming every year. That doesn't necessarily have to be a budget buster if you prepare for it.
Yeah,
Totally.
absolutely.
So if you think about, all right, maybe an exercise to go through, reflect on how much you spent last year on Christmas gifts. There's no, hard and fast rule that says you're going to spend that same amount next year on Christmas gifts, but it might be a good starting point to think about, right?
Yeah.
So if you know how much you spent last year, take that number, try to save up for it. Divide by the number of months you have left until Christmas, and there you go.
There
That's
you
your
go.
goal.
How much did you spend last year?
I got easy overhead. You don't see a ring on my finger.
The ring changes everything.
right.
My little boy turned, he's 3, so we went pretty hard last Christmas. So my budget's gonna have a little break this year.
And actually, my husband and I, we were moving across country. So the year prior, we said, we're not going to exchange Christmas gifts this year. Well, last year, that was last year. But this year, we exchanged Christmas gifts. And I felt like we had some making up to do from last
Well,
year.
it's
So it's a little more than normal. But we had to plan for that. And we had to make sure that we were including in our budget.
I was gonna say, was it in the budget?
Yes,
Well, then there
because,
go.
you spend more money on one end, then, it has to come from somewhere,
Yeah. I often think about like all your expenses is like a long balloon, right?
Yeah.
There's a certain amount of air that's in a balloon. Whether it's evenly distributed or whether you're squeezing one end of it and the other end's getting fatter, at the end of the day, it's the same amount of air, right?
Yeah, it is.
So
That's the
whether
amount
you
of
have
money.
a big Christmas budget and you choose to cut back on dining out to save for it, as long as there's the same amount of air in your budget, you're spending the same amount, that's what's most important.
So we've spoken about fixed expenses, variable expenses, and non-monthly expenses. But what about the emergency fund?
Yeah, emergency fund, very important goal I think everybody should have, right? So you think about what it is, it's just a separate savings account that you have set up to protect you from those things that you really can't anticipate. So 4 big ones that I like to think about: job loss, unexpected medical expenses, unexpected car repair, and unexpected home repair, right? So those are the big reasons why you need an emergency fund. In terms of a dollar amount, you want to look at it in terms of what your monthly spending looks like. So 6 to 9 months of essential spending. right? So that might not include all the dining out, all the ride sharing stuff, but it definitely includes keeping the lights on, keeping a roof over your head, making a minimum payment on all your debts, things like that.
Yeah.
So you figure out what that totals for a month, you multiply it by anywhere from 6 to 9 months, and that is your goal to shoot for the emergency fund. Because what we've been talking about with fixed, variable, non-monthly expenses, these are all things that you can kind of foresee and anticipate, but you know there are some things that you can't anticipate.
Yeah, life just happens sometimes.
Exactly. Right. It's almost to the extent you don't know, you may not know when an emergency is going to happen, but you know that something's going to come up.
Yeah.
Right? And so that's what the emergency fund is there for. So, I mean, it's key that you have it, start saving for it today, work up to it over time.
We've identified your different types of expenses and how to break down a budget. Let's have a look at what we've learned. Yay, great, we have a budget now. But what about those spending habits? Because if you don't take control of your spending habits, then that budget is essentially in vain.
That's the key, right? Budgeting and tracking your expenses so that you can identify your spending habits. I mean, that's a big piece of it. You can use any tool you want, whether you are writing it down on pen and paper, if you're using a money management software program.
Or a spreadsheet.
Yeah. There's got to be a way that you identify what you're spending your money on. Let me give you an example. I was meeting with a lady and we were reviewing her budget. We put our information into this money management program and and then we categorized her expenses. Her top
So like
three,
this is a dining out, this is groceries, all that stuff, right? Okay.
Shopping. So what do you think was the number one category where she was spending her money?
I know when I'm working with people, it's food.
Food, right? Food.
Yeah.
That's what it was.
Overwhelmingly.
In her case, number one was food and dining. Number two was cash and ATM withdrawals.
Yeah.
And number three was auto and travel. But number two was cash and ATM. So we really don't know what categories, they belong to. So when we're trying to identify her spending habits, one of the hurdles is if you're using cash, it's going to be harder to identify. But also, now that we've got it categorized, we know exactly where to pull from now that we can see it.
As a financial coach, what I always tell people is I'm not trying to stand between you and your lattes.
Right.
You got your own kicks, you do you, right? I don't care how you spend your money. I just want you to feel good about it and end up with some money left over so you can reach your goals too.
You shouldn't spend at your detriment.
Right.
That's it. We're not trying to stop you from doing anything, but if it's hurting you, then we need to make an adjustment.
So now that we understand how we're spending our money, let's take a look at what we've learned. So we've identified that we need our spending habits, we know what we spend most of our money on, and we're saying, okay, I need to change a few things. What are some of the things that people can do if they realize that they need to make an adjustment in their spending habits?
A couple different ways I typically approach this with people I meet with. If you feel like there's one or two categories where you feel like you really want to focus on, you're like, oh, my dining out and my ride sharing, that's what I really struggle with, those two things, right? Try to give yourself like a weekly allowance. So explaining that, all right.
Lunch money.
If you, lunch money, that's right, taking it back, old school. If you feel like you spend on average, you did the math on what you typically spend on dining out, and you find out it's $400 a month, right? Break that up into a weekly amount. It's $100 a week, right? So if you want to make a change, base it off what you have been doing. Because if you don't know how much you've been spending and you set a goal for yourself, it might be unrealistic. And that means it's less likely for you to achieve your goal, which can be a little bit demoralizing, right?
Yeah.
And so when you're budgeting, when you're managing your money, you want to try to set up small wins for yourself along the way. A weekly allowance is one way to do that. knowing what you typically spend on stuff is another way to do that. So think about, rather than that $100 weekly allowance, maybe you want to try to cut it back to $70 or $80, right? And then maybe you choose to take the cash out of the ATM every Monday morning, right? And have that go from Monday morning until the next Monday morning. You've got $70 or $80 on
Only
dining
so much
out.
cash.
Only use cash when you dine out. Don't use cash for anything else. Don't put any dining out expenses on the credit card or debit card. It can start to become pretty clear how much you've spent, how much you got left. The weekly time frame, I think, is key.
You know,
Yeah.
I agree. And everything you said was right. But when you're talking about changing habits, I mean, that is, you know, kind of a difficult thing to do
People, yeah.
for most people, right? What I've found is the best catalyst for changing those spending habits, your why has to be really, really strong for why you're going to change that habit. The same lady, she wants to get into investing. And so we look at her budget, and she's spending $1,600 a month on food and dining. And so we move $1,000 a month to her investment account, which leaves her with $600 a month. To your point, $600 a month for dining out, $150 a week, and with her, you know, that's $22 a day. Can you commit to that, you know, before we move on? Or she's less likely to pull from her dream of investing in real estate to stop by, you know, a fast food restaurant.
Yeah.
She's more likely to reach that goal because her money's already spent, but also it's spent in a place where it really means something
Yeah,
to
definitely.
Right. You know, back to a couple key points on that weekly allowance, just to kind of help explain why that can be helpful. It's a lot more difficult for me to think about, okay, if I go out to eat with my friends tonight, what's that going to mean for my budget in 3 weeks? But if I think about it in a week time frame, if I go out to eat on Tuesday night, am I going to have enough money left over to go hang out on Friday night with my friends? And so that's a lot more digestible of a time frame. And believe me, start your allowance on a Monday morning, because if you start it on Friday when you get paid, it's going to be gone by Sunday night.
Right.
I've seen it too many times to count, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So
Financial goals and maintaining your financial goals is creating a new habit, such as going to the gym, working
Sure,
out, eating
sure.
properly, and so forth. And we see it time and time again when you're at the gym. You know, you go up in different weight classes, you try different things.
Let's say I want to change my habits, right? And I want to exercise more regularly because I'm going to feel better about myself and yada, yada, yada. That's the approach already. As opposed to in 6 months, you know, I have a wedding and I've got to get ready to fit into my tux,
Yes.
you know? So now it's a lot more urgent, it's a lot more timely. My approach towards working out or eating right, I'm gonna be more effective in accomplishing that goal because it's more immediate and it's more specific, whether it's budgeting and finance or health and fitness. You have to have a really strong why to change your habits, in my opinion.
And what you just reminded me of is what we were talking about earlier, aspirations and goals, right? I want to start working out again so I can lose weight. That sounds like more of an aspiration. Fitting into a tux in 6 months, I need to lose 6 pounds or whatever it might be. That's a goal, right?
Particular goal.
Working closer toward helping you take some actionable steps. You know, I think about your weightlifting example or going to the gym. One that often comes to mind when I'm working with people is if you are trying a weekly allowance, and let's say your budget for restaurants is $100 a week, and 1 week you go over, you spend $140. It's kind of, you know, you're not feeling great about it, but at the same time, the nice thing is it's a week, it's not a month, so you still got 3 more shots to get it right, even in that same month, hopefully, right?
Right.
But if you overspend on your allowance, then what are you gonna do next week? Are you gonna try to say, okay, rather than spending $100, I'm only gonna spend $60 this week? You didn't make 100, so how likely
not
are you to
likely.
make
Yeah.
60?
It's not likely.
That's like going to the gym, saying, all right, I'm gonna bench press 200 pounds, and I'm gonna do it 6 times. And you get only 4 reps, and that's challenging. It's a little bit frustrating, right? I'm gonna go back to the gym next week. I'm gonna do 6 reps, and I'm gonna do, instead of 200 pounds, I'm gonna do 300 pounds.
Yeah, you can
That's
jump
crazy,
all the way in.
right?
Yeah.
You're setting yourself up for failure when you do that, right?
It's not crazy for me.
It's
Eric.
not crazy for
But I
Cameron, but
understand.
for some of us mortals.
Yeah, for the mortals. I understand.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the key, and like, don't be too hard on yourself. Give yourself a fresh start with that same amount the next week. Don't play
Exactly.
catch up.
So when you're trying to change your habits, you want to give yourself those weekly goals instead of looking at the big monthly goal, because sometimes it's easier to tackle your weekly goal when you break it down into something that's a little more digestible. And giving yourself kind of that runway to work into your goal instead of setting up this goal that you might not be able to reach and then feeling like a failure or feeling, that
Right.
it's unattainable, rather than setting something that's closer to your reach.
What happens when you fail at something?
You can get demoralized.
Yeah. And what happens when you get
Or you're
demoralized?
or you're
You're more
discouraged.
likely to just give up.
Disengage, right?
Yeah.
And so
And
how
that's
often
not
do I
what we
see that
want.
with people I work with when I'm doing coaching is they've had a string of failures in the
Yeah,
system they've set up for
definitely.
themselves, and then after a while they're fed up with it. They don't want to continue to feel bad, right?
Yeah,
And so you want to try to eliminate that. You want to try to create successes for yourself along the way.
Right.
I always remind people you don't have to be perfect, you just have to be committed. You just
Yeah.
have to be committed to
That's
your
a good
financial
point.
goals. So now we're all fired up and ready to implement these changes. Let's have a look at what we've learned. We realize we have to change these spending habits. Is that enough, or do we need to automate? What do you guys think about automation?
I think it comes down to personal preference. I try to automate as much as possible for a couple reasons. I think you can leverage your time, right? I'm leveraging technology so that I have more time. My gas bill, my water bill, my insurance, a lot of these fixed expenses are definitely automated. And I try to, let's say I'm gonna have a shopping budget, right? That's $200 a month. I will go so far as to automate a scheduled transaction to my shopping account so that there's only $200 in there.
Are you talking about like a separate bank account? Okay.
Sure. I'm saying I want to spend. I've set up my budget. I've hit my goals. I've got $200 to spend for shopping. I'm not pulling it from my account. I'm setting up a different account, and I'm moving money automatically from my account each month to this separate account.
Yeah.
And I'm only using this card for shopping.
Yeah.
So once it's out, it's out.
Right.
It's gone. Yeah.
That's my preference.
I meet with a lot of people who like that system, setting up different accounts for different purposes. Maybe you've got one account where your paycheck comes into and some money stays there. Maybe the money for the bills stays in that account,
Right.
But then you have a separate account that's like your fun money or, the things like dining out and ride sharing and things like that. And then maybe you've got a retirement account or a savings account for emergencies, things like that. So having multiple different accounts for different goals can be helpful, because otherwise what happens? You see your savings account, if you're doing a good job at saving for your goals, it's starting to grow, it's getting bigger, but you just see one big number, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And what does that mean to you?
If it's not allocated right, if it says new home on it, that means something different than your savings.
Just
Right.
money in
Exactly.
a savings
Right.
account. Yeah, and
So-
that you haven't given it a job to do yet.
Yeah, you give
Right.
you give yourself more insight into how much progress you're making on all of your goals when you decide to give your account a nickname or set up separate accounts for different things. So
Yeah, I mean, automation for some people, I know that I prefer to do things manually. I just like to be hands-on with my money, but I think that automation actually sets some people up for success. It's one of those things that helps ensure that they use their money towards what they said they wanted to use their money towards.
yeah.
So you do the old-fashioned pen and paper.
I'm old-fashioned when it comes to my money. I
right.
like to touch my money.
All right.
Yeah, there's studies that show you write stuff down and it sinks in a little
It commits
better,
to memory
right?
for me.
It's like tactile.
The best plan is the one that you use. So if it works for you, good.
And that's what's important. There's really no right or wrong way to do
Right.
this as long as you're doing it. But I definitely did want to, for people who say, that automation isn't for them and so forth, I think that it's wonderful that you mentioned setting up a separate account that the automated funds come out of. So it's not coming out of the direct account tied to what you're spending money from regularly. So you kind of take yourself out of the equation and create these bumper guards so that you're not getting those late fees, hopefully, if you've properly managed your budget and allocated money from your maybe the account that you get your income from into the account that you pay your bills from. So that's how automation works smoothly. But also just making sure that you're properly managing your budget. It helps it allows your budget to run smoother and more efficiently.
Agreed.
And automation isn't for everyone. Just like every budget isn't for everyone, but there would be certain elements that work for you.
Absolutely. A couple key things I want to hit, and I think I know where you're going here, is a couple key things I want to hit about automation. It can be very valuable. It can save you a lot of time. It can simplify your financial life. Don't automate a habit that you're not happy with, though, right?
That's true.
That's a good point.
If you feel like you spend too much money on dining out, don't automate a transfer for the amount you normally spend on dining out.
Right.
Because you don't want to spend that much on dining out.
Yeah.
Don't automate until you're happy with how you're spending your money. And then the other key thing to understand is an automatic transfer can be valuable because let's say that your water bill is due on the 10th of the month. If you have an automatic transfer set up to pay it, that money's going to get pulled from your bank account whether it's there or not.
Yes, you
right?
might set a reminder.
Yeah, so it's good in the sense that you're not going to miss your bill payment, but you need to make sure you got the money in your account too.
Right.
Yeah.
So those are the keys. But where I think you're going here is automation is a tool you can use to make it more likely that you'll achieve your goals.
Yeah, definitely.
So
That's where I was going, Eric.
We've all got a lot of goals, right? And if you think about your goals as like pins at the end of a bowling lane, right? You're in a bowling alley and there are pins at the end of your lane. And I don't know about you guys, but I'm a subpar bowler.
All
So
right.
I'm not
What
gonna.
is subpar?
Subpars, it's in the hundreds.
All
Two,
right.
200s would be like
I'm
a
decent.
dream.
I don't think anyone's going to draft me for their bowling league, but I'm decent.
All right. Well, I think we should go tonight and find out. And
Yeah,
see.
we should.
Let's,
All right.
let's see how it actually turns out,
Okay,
right?
sure.
See if you can back up that 300-pound bench press talk.
Listen, man, we're gonna derail this conversation and start talking about how I'm gonna whoop you in bowling.
No.
get-
Tanya's got the bumper rails up for us,
All
right?
Yes, I do.
Okay,
Bumper rails,
let's see.
guys.
All right, so check it out. You got your pins at the end of the lane. Those are your goals. If you don't have bumper rails up, what can you do when you roll the ball?
Gutter ball.
You can hit a gutter ball or you can hit a strike, right?
Speak for yourself.
Well, that's me, right?
Okay.
For me, it's the gutter.
But if you put the bumper lanes up, then what does that do? It makes it way less likely
Right.
that you're going to get a gutter ball. You might get a strike, but you're going to hit something.
Yeah, you're definitely gonna hit something.
Yeah.
Right? And so when you automate some transfers, when you set up a weekly allowance, when you write your goals down, these are key things that you can do to make it more likely that you're going to knock down more pins at the end of the lane.
That's a good analogy.
Thanks. It's yours for the day.
All right. All right.
Automation can help make things simple. Let's have a look at what we've learned. We could talk about budgeting all day long, but we don't have the time. So Eric, Cameron, thank you so much for sharing your expertise. Make sure you check out all of our other courses where you'll find tools, support, and education. See you next time.